Congratulations, Nevin Carr, on being our new county chair. So, welcome to episode 7 of the New Hanover County Action Team. Proven GOP, the will connect you never knew. The convention. Congratulations, Nevin Carr, on being our new county chair. I think you left everyone with an admirable message, and I think everyone should take it to heart. The person who is 80% your ally is not 20% your enemy. I would like to reach out and give you an opportunity to come on my show and share your vision, not only for the future of the county and the future of the party and your policy objectives and priorities, but your specific plan for integrating your former opponents into the machinery of the GOP. I think what we all observed was a great contest between two sets of talented candidates. And I think it would be a great shame if all the energy that was put into the contest that played out at the convention last night were wasted in continued conflict. I would like to do my part to make sure we all are working on the same page. And just so you know, the overarching issue that has motivated me in all of this is to answer the question of why, as a community, we do not have the political courage to fire failing administrators. We are a representative government, and yet we are ruled by unelected officials whom we cannot hold accountable, even when we have the votes to remove them. If that's the kind of issue that you're interested in working on, I am at your service. If you would like to use this platform as a way to reach people that you do not necessarily reach now, I am at your service. If you cannot take advantage of my services or do not want to, I remain at the service of this county and the principles of the Republican Party. And in that, we will still be allies. Now, the convention didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. I was pulling hard for the America First slate. But let's talk about the great things that happened. By my estimate, over 600 people showed up. That means we had about 3 times the number of people we had at the county convention last time. That is a great result for participatory government. And we had demonstrated to us the extraordinary love of community that exists in New Hanover County. And it was expressed not only by our tremendous attendance at the event last night, but by an extraordinary prayer that was given by Debbie Love. It was, in my opinion, the highlight of the event. And in the moment of her prayer, when we all had our heads bowed, all of the people in the party were indeed united. So we know it's possible. Let's try and achieve it. Now, the story of this convention can be summed up in 2 words, and those words are ground game. The proven slate won the ground game. Pure and simple. And regardless of how you feel philosophically, now the story of this convention can be summarized in 2 words, and those words are ground game. And the proven slate won the ground game hands down. And regardless of how you feel philosophically about the 2 different slates, I clearly had a strong bias in favor of the America First slate. One of the things elections do, and we all hate elections, but they select, in some measure, the candidate or slate that is prepared to do the job. It is one measure of how prepared a candidate or slate is, how they are able to navigate the election. And in this case, we are hiring the group of people that we hope will have a good ground game going into the next election. Now, that is not to take anything away from the extraordinary efforts and the talent and the qualifications of the America First slate. I think they're all highly competent people, and I think they're all highly principled people, and I think they could all do a great job in office. Otherwise, I wouldn't have voted for them, which I did. So I don't take anything away from them. Indeed, they were up against a slate which had access to and essentially was redeploying a ground game machinery that had been used in the November election. And they were just repurposing it for this internal election. So they had those advantages. Whether all the means they used within the use, and some may say manipulation of that machinery, were ethical is not the question, I think, that people who wonder why it didn't go the way they wanted it to go need to ask. Because if that was your assumption going in, then that's what you needed to prepare for. And the America First slate chose the task of taking on a slate that was going to have access to the machinery of the ground game that had been prepared for the November elections. And that didn't happen. Then there was also the issue of preparation for the event itself. I was not on the inside of those preparations, so I had the advantage in terms of being a witness, of being able to sort of report on this from the point of view of someone who was new to the process, someone who had been recruited by either slate to get up off their couch and participate in a county convention, which most people aren't even aware of. It's a pretty granular, micro-specific political involvement event. So if I were one of those people who were coming in without too strong of a bias, like I had, and I were doing a significant amount of my evaluation of the two slates based on their performance during the event, again, I saw one organization that was much more professional and prepared and slick in their presentation than the other. So the reason I started with the ground game is not because I want to ignore the allegations from episode 6, which is that there would be some shenanigans connected to the choosing of delegates. And I think there are some procedural questions to be asked, but I also have to analyze the event fairly. And if I have to rank the things that went into the outcome, the ground game that happened before the convention was even held, to me, is number one. I just think that the machinery of getting people out there and knocking doors and calling people and texting people, regardless of what the content of those calls were. I've heard a lot of rumors. I've had some of those rumors confirmed. And I don't want to get into that, not because, hey, Ashley, aren't you the guy who makes everything public? I think these things should be spoken about publicly. But in the aftermath of the event, I think we have to rank things in terms of their order of importance. So the ground game started for the GOP's proven slate much earlier than for the other slate. So, I mean, what can you do but commend them? And what can you do but expect them to do the same thing in the next election? So again, if I'm a guy who doesn't have a bias going in, but my first contact is made 3 or 4 months out, and then I have multiple other contacts following that, and then someone pops in at the last month and goes, hey, we're the alternative. Even if I love what they have to say and I'm rooting for them, I might feel like, okay, now's not the right time for you. And I think that's a totally legitimate decision to be made. So it's not that I don't want to talk about some of the potential issues there were at the convention. I didn't witness anything egregious, so I can't report that. I got to report what I saw. And I have to think about what it was like to be, a punter, so to speak. And again, this is taking nothing away from the America First slate. I gave them my vote with all of my heart and would do it again. Again, if I'm just someone who's coming in for the first time, I'm new to this, regardless of which slate brought me in, if I'm evaluating them in the moment based on who came off as more professional, more organized, slicker in their presentation, there was no comparison. So if you weren't there, the person who was supposed to nominate the America First slate and then give the speech in support of their candidacy wasn't in the room at the time that he was supposed to do these things. And I'm not calling this person out, but it's like missing your cue in a play. It happens, but if it's on the night the reviewers are there and you get a bad review, and this wasn't just I'm late for my cue, this was he didn't show up at all, was gone from the room for whatever, 10 minutes, the crucial 10 minutes. So the America First slate had to scramble in front of everybody and get Jude Eden, a precinct chair, I forget what number of precinct she's chair of, to go do it. And then she wasn't prepared to do the speech. It's hard to speak in front of people. I have to do multiple cuts to make it seem like I have a reasonable flow of words here. Public speaking is very difficult, especially when you're not expecting to have to do it. And so Jude wanted to defer to Paige, and so Paige went up there, and then the chair called her out of order, which seemed tough, but the rules had been set out, and you got to abide by the rules. The whole thing did not look good. Jude then gave a good speech, given the circumstances, and I think she acquitted herself as well as can be expected. And I think that snafu might not have been so consequential if it hadn't been compounded by the clear difference in the quality of the speeches between the two chair candidates, Jonathan and Nevin. I didn't think Nevin's speech was particularly substantive. Much as in the town hall, there was a lot of time spent quoting famous conservatives from the past and speaking in terms of high-flown principles and this and that, and not really addressing that many substantive issues. Certainly not how he was going to address the shortcomings of the Knecht administration, whose mantle he was donning. And you would think if you're trying to reach across the aisle, you would maybe acknowledge some of the things that could have been done better and that you intend to do better. Didn't touch on any of that. But he spoke in short, declarative, clear statements. He came in under time. He was invested with a sense of purpose and urgency. He connected with the crowd, and he got a great general applause. So given the time frame, he did what he needed to do. I know I was sitting amongst people who said, okay, it's a lot, there's not a lot of substance there, but the presentation matters in that situation too. Jonathan Tueller, on the other hand, who, in his life has proven himself to be an organizational whiz. He runs 4 very successful businesses, and I'm sure if he were to take the reins of the Republican Party that he would learn the machinery and run it quite well. That said, in the moment that he was given to present himself for that role, he tried to recreate, I think, the speech that he made during the town hall, which would have been fine if he'd been allotted 10 to 15 minutes to do that. He wasn't. He was allotted 5 minutes. I think what he talked about was more substantive than what Nevin had to say, and I liked that. But in terms of the presentation, he felt unprepared. And in that situation, you can't come off as unprepared. And not only did he come off as unprepared, but he came off without a sense of urgency. And if you're trying to convince people that it is super important that the county change direction, you need to communicate that urgency. And it needs to matter enough to you for you to come in prepared. And I'm not saying it didn't matter to him, but I'm talking about the effect of a speech that seems like care wasn't taken in the preparation of it. So I don't know if the difference in presentation between the two slates changed any minds in the building. But if they had, I would understand that. So those are the two issues that I wanted to start with, because to me, if you take those two things together, the ground game, what people were given to expect coming into the convention, and the difference in performance at the convention, I think you have most of the ball of wax. So I didn't want to foreground the procedural stuff that I didn't love, because that stuff was there before and during, but I don't think it was determinative. I think all of the nonsense could have been overcome through better ground game, better preparation, and better execution. And I'm going to keep saying this. I say that with love for the people on the America First slate, and with tremendous appreciation for their efforts and the humility to know that I couldn't have done it. This is just analysis. okay? And maybe I'm overqualifying because it's hard for me to say, but there it is. Now, to address the things I didn't love about the convention, I think I've already spoken about the issue with the precinct chairs. I've already spoken about the issue with skipping regular meetings and having special meetings through Zoom and having a limited agenda and changing the rules of the convention 10 days before the convention. I think it's great that the Proven Slate had a good ground game. It's somewhat disingenuous to try and activate a bunch of new people and get them involved in the process and then also change the rules at the last minute. Because, of course, if you're bringing a bunch of new people into the process, there's a lot of stuff you have to explain to them. And bringing in new rules at that late moment, and especially in the context of a special Zoom meeting instead of a public regular meeting, excludes people from the process. So it's not a good habit of representative democracy to set things up procedurally so that people don't have all the necessary information to participate fully. So that was an anti-populist move. That was a pro-centralized control move, and it was anti-democratic, in my opinion. And then you put people in a position where they have to vote on these new rules just to get the convention started. And the problem there is that, again, the combination of the precinct meeting and the convention meant that people who are already coming in not really knowing what the situation is are at another level of a disadvantage. They don't necessarily come in knowing that, hey, I paid the $20 or the $10 or whatever, and I'm not going to get to vote. All of this stuff could have been sorted out before. It felt like, first of all, it just felt like a bad use of time, but it also felt like a way of avoiding the input of the people. None of the resolutions that were brought to the convention were even considered because we ran over time. Sorry, that was clearly by design because the precinct meeting should have been on another day. People were unsure what to do and had to rely on the people at the convention to tell them how everything worked, and the instructions were clear. That said, when it comes to explaining to people what it means to be a delegate and hey, it's kind of a pain in the butt to go to the district and the state convention, and there's a fee and all this, and these are people who have just been convinced to come out and participate. A lot of those people are going to go on tilt with all this new information and just go, I can't decide, so I'm going to let the experts take care of it. I think we're trying to avoid rule by experts in our party. I think our country has experienced the horror show that rule by experts is. And I think as a party, we should be unified against it. And we certainly shouldn't practice it within our own party. So that whole organizational thing, I feel like, if the point could have been made in Jude's speech or Jonathan's speech that, hey, one thing we won't do if we run the party is we won't put the precinct meeting and the convention on the same day so that anyone who comes in fresh is completely overwhelmed by the process and just has to trust whatever they hear from the people in power instead of being empowered to make their own critical decision. I think that might have made a difference in people's minds. But again, everyone was overwhelmed by the process, and I think this was by design. Okay. And I think the specific rule change, which I'm finally getting around here to, of limiting a resolution to 150 words. I mean, the Declaration of Independence is 1,337 words, depending on how you count, right? It's very hard to resolve anything of meaning within 150 words. And I think the purpose of this rule change was to basically shut down resolutions, which again is a way of taking the people's voice away from them. And then we all had to vote on it just so we could open the convention. So there was all this pressure in the way the event was set up for us to just go, let's do the rules, let's get it started, this precinct, there's so much stuff we have to do. Poor AJ Dowd, he's not gonna get home till very late. Well, that's what you signed up for, pal. And I'm sure you were happy to do it, but I think the procedural pressures for people who were new to the process and even people who are old to the process were bad practice. Hopefully the new administration, who after all aren't responsible technically for how the convention was run, I hope they'll do things differently in the future. That was not pro-participation. It was suboptimal. Now, the final vote count was surprising. It was 266 for Nevin Carr's slate and 149 for Jonathan Chiller's slate, which means there were 415 delegates. That was pretty surprising. That number felt low to me for the total number of delegates. But again, I didn't really have the bandwidth to track what the total of possible delegates was given the precinct numbers that showed up. In other words, there were some precincts that had more than their allotment of delegates there. So those people were excluded correctly. And then there were some precincts that didn't have any people show up. And from the point of view of the ground game of both slates, I think that is shocking and something everyone needs to work on. But I think we had 560 odd people pre-registered, and certainly we had a line of people registering on the day of. I think we had over 600 people there. So just looking at the room, all the people who didn't end up being delegates were asked to move to the back of the room, just so we knew that everyone who was an authorized delegate after the precinct process was voting and no one who wasn't was. Didn't look to me like there were 185 plus people at the back of the room. It really didn't. It felt low as a total delegate number. I don't know why the ballots had to be counted in a back room. There's no clear reason for that. Especially since earlier in the night, when there was a vote about changing the text of the rules for the convention to get rid of the 150-word limitation on the resolutions, there was a hand count of people standing in favor of getting rid of the 150 words. So just in terms of making people feel good about the outcome of it, especially Republicans who feel like they've been screwed in elections where the counting happens in a black box, why are we putting it in a black box? Yes, we have representatives from both slates there, but why not just count it out? My God, it doesn't take any more time in front of the people than it does in a back room. And it doesn't have the stench of a back room attached to it afterwards. So I didn't like that procedure. I also didn't, if that's the way we were going to do it, I don't think the chain of custody really fully remained intact. So, I think it's important to have trust in elections, but I think it needs to be trust and verify, because opponents are highly motivated to exploit any loopholes in the system. And if you're going to say to me, okay, here's a box and it's on stage, and we all watch the ballots go into the box, we all watch the people come up and put the ballots in the envelopes, and the envelopes go into the box, and when everyone's come up and put the things into the envelopes and all the envelopes go into the box, we put a lid on it, and it's a box, a clear plastic box with a blue lid that is indistinguishable from any other clear plastic box with a blue lid. There's nothing marking it. There's nothing that identifies it. And that wouldn't be a problem, except for when the box was taken out of the room, it went into the custody of two people, the sheriff and a representative of the party. I assume that those two people are trustworthy and ethical. However, I think it's a bad practice to rely on ethics and trustworthiness of people who are inside the machinery of the party. If your claim is that we can trust the vote because there's a representative from each slate present in the room when the ballots are counted, they need to be with that box from when it's taken out of public sight all the way through the counting, walking to the room, counting, all the way walking back and brought back to public sight, okay? Otherwise, I'm very sorry, but the chain of custody is broken. how can we keep getting the chain of custody thing wrong? I'm not saying anything happened. If I had gone in there and I had seen something that screamed to me election fraud, believe me, I'd be screaming it from the top of the hills. I don't think any of you have any doubt about that. I didn't see it, but I was really confused about why, when the room was shut, no one was allowed to go out of the front door, and anyone who wanted to, needed to pee or whatever, had to go through the back door at the side of the stage. And the back room where they were going to count the ballots was also back there. Why did the ballots not go through that door with the representatives from each slate? Why did they go into the custody of two individuals, come through the audience, go out the front door, and then come all the way back to the back? Why even create the appearance of an opportunity for the chain of custody to be broken? It's just dumb. Now, there was some other crazy stuff that went on there. Chris Sutton was going to put up a resolution. There's it was really shady what happened. Did it have an effect on the outcome of the convention? No. That's why I sort of put it here. But the fact that it would happen just highlights how much more scrupulous we need to be in creating safeguards to monitor against shenanigans and malfeasance at these conventions. Anyway, Chris Sutton had this resolution that he put up, basically to go back to the system where we voted on individuals and not on slates. And he had his box with his copies. He had 400 copies available to the convention, given to the secretary, and for the resolution to be considered valid. And he was talking to people and getting them, he was pushing his resolution. He put the box back down, he turned around, and it disappeared. And many people spent the next couple of hours looking around the whole convention for this box, which just disappeared. The box then magically reappeared just after Chris's precinct voted. And no accounting for who took it or who returned it or what had happened to it during all that time has yet emerged. Fortunately, and I give A.J. Dowd, who ran the convention, credit for this. He heard what happened. And in fact, when he first heard it, he thought that the ballot box had disappeared, and he was ready to call the whole convention off, which would have been the right thing to do because the whole thing is vitiated at that point. So credit to A.J. Dowd. He was about to go nuclear, which is, man, listen, he didn't love me and threatened to call security on me. I think because he thought I was trying to make trouble. I don't think I was trying to make trouble. We'll talk about that in a second. But I give him a lot of credit for having the balls. I can say balls on my own show, right? The balls to stand up in front of 600 plus people in the friggin' third hour of this marathon and go, it's over because we can't fix this process anymore. So credit to him, even though it was a mistake, he made a really tough call. And then he was quickly corrected. And then to give him more credit, because this has happened, he didn't say, oh, well, Chris, you don't have your 400 whatever copies. You can't. He let Chris go ahead and present his resolution. And there was another resolution that was presented. I forget what it was even. And David was able to present his resolution. That was all fine. But at the end of the day, I think the whole event was set up so those resolutions would never have time to be passed, which is what in fact ended up happening. And I think, again, the new rules were set up so that none of those resolutions could even be read. So just to skip backward, the other part of the procedure that I found disturbing was the argument that I was involved with Dowd and the parliamentarian rule sample about the wording of the rule and the fact that the way they had written it, the change to the rules about the presentation of resolutions was clearly to take effect after the convention. I was certainly interested to challenge this rule because I felt it was unfairly excluding a resolution that I was in favor of. I was also against this rule because, as I said, I feel it's designed to basically torpedo all resolutions. Nobody's coming up with a meaningful resolution that's fewer than 150 words. I think that's very unlikely. It takes the teeth out of that mechanism for the expression of the policy goals of the electorate. It takes the voter's voice away. Resolutions are a way for an individual voter to bring something to the convention that is not being given to them to rubber stamp by whoever happens to control the party machinery. And to get rid of it is to make the party less democratic. And so I was against it for that reason. But I was against it for another reason too, because if the language as it was written had not been respected, but we'd been asked to vote on the convention rules and then apply them under an interpretation that didn't match the language, we would have set a precedent of doing business in the party that would empower the people on the stage, the guy running the convention or the parliamentarian or the secretary or whatever, to impose their own interpretation on anything. And as I said at the microphone, that would endow them with an arbitrary and absolute power which completely undermines the representative nature of the event. So there was a whole series of really serious things that motivated me to make that objection. And most of the people in the building agreed with me. And after Dowd backed off on his threat to throw me out, since he was saying, if you're out of order, I'm going to have the police remove you. They had a vote, and they did a vote first by acclaim, and the ayes clearly had it. But that's not what the people on stage wanted. So they did a stand up to indicate your vote, and again, the ayes clearly had it. And then for the next 10 minutes, we had to sit through this absurd theater of Ruel Sample very seriously trying to count everyone in the audience. And I think what he ended up doing was just counting this center tranche and, sort of seeing what the difference was there and trying to reckon whether that difference could be made up by adding the two wings. We had to sit through this whole charade when it was obvious to everyone in the room after the first vote by acclaim what the outcome had been. So I found that sequence pretty shameful. Could you make the argument that they have a higher standard of certainty? Like, maybe as a parliamentarian or someone who runs a convention, you go, you know what? I'm not trying to take a guess if it's a 60-40, if it sounds like 60-40. Unless it sounds like 80-20 or higher, I recount. However many times I need to recount. You can make that argument. But when you combine that with Ruel Sample's attempt to explain that the time indication of the paragraph changes halfway through the paragraph without a new paragraph break, or another conjunction indicating a different time, and the chair, AJ Dowd, also asserting his right to interpret what it really means. Clearly they were trying to hang on to the rules as they had written them. And so I don't think they were being even-handed in that instance. And look, fog of war, intensity of the moment, this is why these things are challenging, and those guys have to fight their own emotions like everybody else, and they do the best they can. I think they could have done better. And the reason that's of significance is just to say, I think it's so important in terms of confidence in the process not to ever have that appearance. And maybe they would say, well, if we hadn't recounted twice, people on the other side would have said the same thing. Now, other things that were a little bit worrisome, stuff we talked about. I talked to one guy who didn't end up being selected as a delegate, in spite of the fact that two people who had said they absolutely didn't want to be delegates did end up being selected as delegates. One of them said, I think it was a travel nurse, said she had to be out of town, and another one said, I don't have time for all this nonsense, I don't want to do it. And he said he wanted to be there, and he had been identified by the precinct leader as someone who was going to vote for the America First slate. I think we kind of knew that this stuff was going to happen. And honestly, once one faction does take control of a party, it's hard to unbake those home field advantages out of the pie. So, I heard one story, and I think I had, established myself as someone that people would come to and tell stories like that if they were there to be told, and I heard one. So I don't think that was determinative. And I know a lot of people don't like hearing, well, there was shenanigans going on, but it didn't affect the outcome. They want to hear there was no shenanigans. But I think not many shenanigans has to be kind of reported as not many shenanigans. And I think it's also important to say, I don't think it was determinative. The other thing that I didn't love about the whole procedure was, of course, the use of law enforcement to intimidate and threaten and exclude. So obviously, Lisa Wilkins, a member of the New Hanover County Republican Women's Club, was served 4 times in the lead up to the convention, 3 with assault charges that are, listen, if you're not there, you don't know. I know that the charges that were brought against me were spurious, but that's because I was there. And you don't know if I'm telling the truth or not, and no one who wasn't there knows. So, I don't expect anyone to take my word, and I'm not gonna say what happened in the Lisa Wilkins cases. It's just, it feels like a pattern with Rick, and I don't think there's any witnesses to any of these things, and one of them is going back a long ways. So it's, the timing of it is interesting. Like I said in the last episode or a previous episode, I don't think anything's going to happen with any of these charges. But the fourth thing that Lisa Wilkins was served with is she was told that she would be trespassed and led away by police if she showed up at the convention. So, okay, that excluded 2 voters from the convention. It was not determinative in the outcome, but it's a terrible practice. It's unacceptable. It gives the lie to the whole conciliatory unity tone that Will Knecht has been putting out there and that the Proven Slate put out there. They won on ground game, but the way they did it leaves a lot to be desired. And then, of course, AJ Dowd threatening to throw me out if I was out of order. Well, okay, look, so I spoke to the floor of the convention without saying my name and without saying my precinct number, and that was out of order, and I corrected that when I was told to correct that. And it's not clear to me how what exactly he was threatening to throw me out for, other than I was arguing with him. That didn't go anywhere, but it felt heavy-handed. And again, I don't think you should be heavy-handed about these things. It would have been interesting to see if he would have thrown anyone out if their phone had gone off. I don't think he would have. I don't know. You can never say. I think, as I said, it was a great way for people to make people take it seriously. I think if someone's phone had gone off and he had thrown them out, even if they'd said, I'm sorry, I'll turn it off, or I'll give it up to the officer or whatever, then that's heavy-handed. But that didn't happen, so we can't say. But he was heavy-handed with me. But, look, all of the nonsense really happened before the convention. And all of the nonsense that did happen before the convention, and I've gone into it in extraordinary detail if you have the time to watch any of the teasers leading up to this. What I love about the teasers are people like, I've seen your video. Yeah, it's pretty strong stuff. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched the beginning and I'm like, all right, look. The red meat comes at the top, so you'll watch. The ideas come in the middle, so you'll think. And that's a hard thing to figure out, which I guess actually brings us to the last set of considerations. One of the things that happened that was really surprising is that a lot of people who were NHCCC faithful ended up voting. I mean, I don't know if it was a lot, but several people who really surprised me. And I've seen some things, or at least, well, one thing anyway, online. I don't check the returns that way too much, but I saw one, and I imagine I think it probably reflects the way a good number of people feel. A lot of people felt that there was too much petty bickering coming from the other side, and I think probably a lot of people put my content in the last couple of weeks into that category, and I would object to that. But regardless of your intentions, and regardless of what you actually deliver, you do have to reckon with how your stuff is received. You know, when you put something out there, you're not responsible for whether someone watches the whole thing. You're not responsible for whether you say, okay, look, this is me just talking. If you want to look at the evidence, it's in the description. You're not responsible for whether they go and look at the evidence. You know, the show started out as an interview show so that issues, policies, and strategies, things that are going on within the party, could be discussed in long form, and that we would be able to think rationally about these things and get away from the inflammatory nature of the memosphere. And it was funny when I was putting the first several episodes out, as people saying, these are great, but can you give me something that's like 5 seconds? And I'm like, no, 5 seconds is the emotional trigger window. And the fact that we're all dealing on the emotional trigger window first is the giant wall that separates us from actual fruitful, intellectually rigorous discussion. I'm willing to have my mind changed, and many people are, but almost no one is willing to enter into a discussion with someone with whom they've had an all-out firefight online in these little snippets of vitriol. That's a word I heard. Vitriol. I'm shocked by the vitriol. Okay, so the question then is, how do you address issues that are very serious and express how serious they are without seeming like you're engaging in vitriol? And I'm not sitting here trying to pretend that I never crossed the line into vitriol. That said, I did work pretty hard to back up every claim I made with hard evidence, and also to explain my thinking behind why it was important to bring it all forward. Look, I think we need to talk about the fact that the GOP protected a woke administrator who needed to go. And they did it by undermining a conservative candidate after the primary and before the general. And we have to deal with that. It doesn't just go away, or else it just keeps happening. We have to deal with the fact that someone who is now serving as our first vice chair hit someone on a campaign staff. That 3 people were coordinated by the chair who just left, Will Knecht, who's failing upward to the state level. We have to deal with the fact that they used the law to try and crush someone who was guilty of the sin of reporting the fact that he had been attacked. You know, I'm not scared of Rick or of Wayne. Neither of them hurt me physically. And I even understand where they're coming from, but I can't approve it. And it can't be tolerated in the party. It just can't be. And if I were the only person to whom it had happened, that would be one thing. But then we have the whole Lisa Wilkins situation. We can't run a party like this. It's not serious. And we cannot grow a party like this. And as far as calling out Tide Turners and Jonathan, Jonathan Q. Bridges, right? As far as calling them out, they're stirring the pot of divisiveness in this party. And they're undermining policy successes by dealing in all this crazy labeling. Who cares? Good Lord, we need to congratulate any public official who does the right thing. We can't very well say, hey, you better run to the middle to attract those Democrats in the general, and then turn around when people get in office and go, don't do anything with Democrats. It's about policy, guys. Policy, all right? And here's the deal. If we want to have a healthier public debate, it is of necessity going to become a more uncomfortable public debate. And times that I've screwed up, and Rick is screwed up, and Wayne is screwed up, and anyone else has screwed up, need to be talked about, okay? And I'm sure there's a lot of people going, Ashley, you threw fame on the fire, and look what happened. Okay, I have to consider that. But I want everyone to consider the alternative, which is laws are broken, people are bullied, leftist administrators are protected, conservative candidates are undermined and not protected. Melissa begged for some protection from Will, and he never gave it to her. We have to distinguish between saying things that are inflammatory and serve no purpose and saying things that inflame people because they're very difficult to hear. People don't want to hear that Will Knecht had a female candidate come to him and tell him that she didn't feel safe at GOP headquarters and do nothing about it. If before the election isn't the time to talk about it, when is the time to talk about it? And believe me, I go through this in my head all the time. You should have just done something right away. And if I had any advice to anyone, is if someone puts their hands on you, tell the police immediately, because I undermined my entire case, all of my credibility, by not calling Rick on it the first time he did it. I didn't have to pursue anything. I didn't have to, I could have called the police, I could have made the report, and I could have filed the charges and dropped them later. But the time between when it happened, between when I filed the charges, that allowed him to get his version of the truth in there. And I think it's a classic mistake that people who get victimized make. And I'm not making myself, I'm a victim. No, I'm someone who mishandled a situation because I blamed myself for how it went down. And because I blamed myself for how it went down, it made it much easier for everyone else in the community who wanted to blame me for it go along with that. So I know I did that to myself. But then again, here I am now. You know, we talked about all this stuff and we said, look, we don't want to mess things up for the party in the general. We need as many Republicans to win as we can, right? It's too high stakes to derail what the whole party is doing to bring this up now, but we got to bring it up after the election. And I'll tell you what, I should have done it immediately after the election. So I hear all the criticisms, you know, and like, look, you know, I mean, one thing you learn as you get older, I learned things a little later than most people, but one thing that becomes so extraordinary to you as you get into your fifth decade or into your sixth, I'm in my sixth decade now, is how much your mind can change over the course of your life. So I hear the objections that are out there like, oh, well, you should just let it lie. And I don't know how I'll feel about them in the future. Up to this point, I haven't heard a single good justification. I just haven't. We can't have that kind of malfeasance in our party. And we can't just take abuse. Because here's the news. What if it happens again after the primary, before the general? And someone decides to make a huge friggin' stink about it. Then are we protecting the party? That person has the right to do it. We are not protecting the party then. And if the party isn't protecting our kids by getting rid of Faust, what's the point of it all? I hear everyone who says, ugh, I'm tired of the bickering, but not every complaint is bickering. People need to be held accountable. And that process is going to be uncomfortable. So, if I'm calling everyone else to continually examine why they choose to talk about some things and choose not to talk about some other things, or why they choose to talk to some people and choose not to talk to some other people, obviously I have to do the same thing. So here we are. We have the leadership we have. We all made our choices. How are we going to live with them? Are we going to hold our leaders accountable? I hope so. There's some signs I want everyone to look out for, though. I have a friend, a contact at the state level, who's a delegate to the state convention. And he says that they are considering a new party loyalty rule, which in his opinion will be used to shut down all dissent within the party. And if we think we can succeed at the polls, if we think we can fulfill our promise as a party, if we think we can live up to our principles by quashing debate and eliminating dissent, we have lost our minds and the Republican Party is moribund. So I hope that loyalty measure doesn't pass, because loyalty is an important conservative principle. I get that, but it doesn't trump right and wrong. It doesn't trump accountability. It doesn't trump the animating contest of ideas. It doesn't trump the free market of ideas. It doesn't trump meritocracy. It doesn't trump transparency. It doesn't trump access. It doesn't trump free speech. It only has meaning within the context of honoring all of those principles. It ain't about the team. It's about what the team represents. So I will continue to try and improve the way I represent the party and its principles, and I hope all of you will too. And I wish the new chair the best of luck, and you are welcome on my show anytime to have a platform. And remember, the time for action is now. I'm going to be away for a month. Hopefully when I come back, we'll have Nevin Carr on the show. Good night.